Okay, it started. Hello, my name is Joanne Lee. I'm current chair of the diversity committee known as Ideas Committee in the Department of Psychology at UT Austin. I'm also an associate professor, a faculty member. In the psychology, my specialty is within the behavioral neuroscience. I study learning and memory, especially learning and memory related to drug addiction, so drug-related memory. So when I'm not doing this, I teach, and I also have my own lab that I oversee. So that's my brief intro, and let Kimberly take away.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Kimberly Terry. I am the graduate program administrator for the Department of Psychology, and I work with the fabulous Dr. Frances Champagne. We work together to oversee and administer the graduate program. So we do admissions all the way through graduation. And I will let Frances say a few words.
Hi, yes, I'm Frances Champagne. I'm the graduate advisor for the department currently. I won't be in September, but the graduate advisor works with the graduate coordinator to kind of think about the program and make sure everyone has what they need and think about kind of how future changes might be needed.
Great, so I'll go ahead and share our PowerPoint. Can everyone see it okay? Basically, we want to just go through just kind of a brief overview of what our program and programs that are similar to us look like. And then also we'll have plenty of time for questions. We're also going to try to address, as Joanne mentioned, some of the questions that you all sent in prior to today. So Frances, if you'd like to go ahead and get started.
Sure. Okay, so, and this actually addresses one of the questions. So there was a question about kind of the areas of psychology that are covered by our program, and all that information can be found on our website. But generally in our program, we have two different degree programs. So one is the kind of general psychology program, and this involves research focused on behavioral neuroscience, cognition, brain and behavior, developmental psychology, individual differences in evolutionary psychology, perception, brain and behavior, and social psychology. So really a pretty broad coverage of the field. We also have a clinical psychology program, which really is a clinical scientist program, which I'll maybe explore a little bit more when we talk about the questions, but it is a research-oriented program, but that provides trainees with training in kind of therapeutic practice and psychology. It's accredited by the American Psychological Association and the Psychological Clinical Science Accreditation System. So you apply to one of these programs depending on your interests and goals that we'll talk a little bit more about. Okay, so another question that, I think is really the fundamentals of what this program is all about. So your time in our PhD program is spent doing coursework, doing mentored research, engaging in teaching activities, and for those in the clinical psychology program, engaging in clinical training. I would say the common theme of both the general psychology and the clinical psychology program is mentored research. They are research-heavy programs. Our PhD program is a research-oriented degree program. So mentored research really means that you're being admitted into the program to work usually with a primary mentor, research mentor, a faculty in our department. Hopefully you'll have other co-mentors who will help kind of enrich your expertise in different areas, and we certainly encourage that. But you're working with a mentor and their research labs to develop new research ideas, to execute those experiments that you come up with, and kind of contribute new knowledge. So that's really a lot of the program is geared towards towards scaffolding and developing that research ability. The coursework usually occurs in the early years of the program, gives you some quantitative training in statistics, gives you, and we have three core courses that cover kind of general areas of psychology so that you get a little bit more breadth in your training. So for example, you might be really interested in behavioral neuroscience, but we also want students to know a little bit about social psychology or cognitive psychology. And so those core courses allow you to get that breadth. As I mentioned, stats is very important. Stats and data sciences are really fundamental to psychological science. And so we want to make sure that if you're designing studies, you know how to analyze the data in a rigorous way. So, and that will really set you up for success within and outside the program. We also require that students take an ethics course. So we do offer an ethics course in the department, but there is also ethics courses outside the department that people can take. And then typically the coursework is happening in the first 2 years, and then dissertation research. So working on your specific research, developing ideas, and working towards a dissertation proposal that will form the basis of your proposed PhD will take up the rest of the time. So generally, you've got 2 years of coursework. People then enter into kind of this dissertation research phase and spend 3 to 4 years in that phase, with a total program length typically between 5 and 6 years. The clinical students do an internship year in their 6th year, so they go off to kind of kind of practice their clinical skills in a specific clinical context during that year. So I think we aim for 5, but usually it's around 5 to 6 years. Okay, so always lots of questions about funding. So all students, so when you get an offer letter from our department, you're kind of guaranteed funding for 5 to 6 years. So what does that mean? So it means that we're going to make sure that you receive kind of a minimum amount of financial support during your time. Currently, that level is $28,000 a year, and that's meant to cover 12 months. So the expectation is that you're a full-time graduate student, that you're spending your time researching, doing coursework, and you get the $28,000 to compensate you for that time. It is not a tremendous amount of money, but I think and you'll hear a little bit about this, I think, in the next session about life in Austin. I think if you have roommates or manage your finances appropriately, you can usually stretch this and make it work. Of course, there's tuition to attend UT, but we make sure that that's covered. So you won't have any costs in terms of tuition on top of that. So the $28,000 is really to support you. We also have health coverage built into the program, so you won't have to be paying in addition to that. So, to kind of be able to provide that $28,000 year of funding, we have different ways, of you working in the department or at the university to achieve that. And so there's 3 main forms of funding: graduate research assistantships, teaching assistantships, and fellowships. So a graduate research assistant is really, we're paying you to do research in the lab. And the way that may work depends on the lab you're working with, and we really try to encourage a nice dialogue between the researcher, the faculty that you're working with, and the student about what that will entail. But basically, you're working on a research project in the lab. This allows you to train in lab techniques and research protocols, data collection management. So it's all really supporting your training well. Typically, the money for this is coming from grants that the faculty mentor will have. And often our grad students, when they're in this role, are supervising undergraduate researchers that can be a wonderful resource for helping support your own research and collecting data. All right. Now, usually at some point during their time in the graduate program, our graduate students will be a teaching assistant or even an assistant instructor. So a TA or a teaching assistant helps faculty with course administration. They attend class, they hold office hours, they prepare proctor and grade exams and assignments. So they work with the faculty member to support the teaching in the environment. And it's a really rewarding experience because you're helping other students to thrive in the course. And it will also give you a lot of insights into the do's and don'ts of how you design a topic. Eventually, if you've got enough teaching experience, then you could apply to be an assistant instructor where you're the instructor of a course. So you have to take some training to do this and some additional TA work. And then you can run a class. And we have over 2,400 undergraduate majors, so there's always lots of classes to do. We would love to give people opportunities to develop a course, but also just to get practice in teaching some of the existing courses that might be something you might do later on in your career. All right, so those are the nuts and bolts of the program. Kimberly, can you think of any kind of main things that I've missed out before we get into the questions?
I think that's kind of the general. We wanted to just give you a sort of a basic idea of how the program functions and then leave time for your questions.
So one thing I'll say, and there was definitely a theme in the questions that were submitted prior to this session, just kind of asking about kind of what kind of program you should think about, and really getting at that question about what is a psychology degree, like. And I'd say if you're thinking of, a psychology PhD program, I think one question you have to ask yourself is if you're really interested in being a clinician, a psychologist who works kind of in a therapeutic capacity with patients, or if you're interested in research. And it's sometimes hard to know that for sure at this stage. But our program is really designed for research. Even though we have a clinical psychology program, it's really training you to be a researcher who can research with a patient population, as opposed to individuals whose pure goal is to really work in a therapeutic context. Counseling psychology programs are more geared towards those individuals who want to practice psychology. PsyD programs, there was another question about PsyD programs. PsyD programs are more hands-on training to be a psychologist, whereas we're training you to be a researcher in the field of psychology, which is a very different goal. So I think you have to ask what your real interests are. And we have a mentored research program, as I mentioned. And so a lot of these, kind of the success, I think we'll talk a little bit about admissions later on, but finding a lab and a research group that really resonates with you. Are they asking questions that you're really compelled with? Because spending 5 to 6 years on something, you want it to be something that you're really interested in, learning the techniques of how you ask questions in that field. So I think it's good to stop and ask yourself those questions and figure out whether a program fits with you. And what we tell the students who are interviewing in our program is really feel out whether the lab that you want to work in is a good fit for you, if the mentoring style is a good fit, if the research questions are a good fit. And we really encourage you to reach out to faculty prior to the admissions process to get a sense of what that experience will be like. What is their mentoring style? What kind of research questions are they currently asking? And we'll probably later on in this summer post a list of which faculty are recruiting graduate students and what topics those labs will cover, so that you know who to kind of reach out to. You can look at who's accepting students, who's not accepting students, and kind of plan accordingly, because you don't want to apply to a program to work with someone who's not taking students. We want to avoid that. So that'll be on the admissions, grad admissions website on our psychology website. Okay, so I mentioned PsyD programs. A PhD really is geared towards people who are interested in research, and that could eventually lead you to an academic context, like be a faculty member in a university, but also non-academic jobs where you're doing research. You've kind of developed skills for testing hypothesis and analyzing data and asking really important research questions. So even though it's psychology and we tend to think of psychology as being a psychologist, we're not really training you to be a psychologist. We're training you to be a researcher in the fields of psychology. Let's see. So in terms of the research areas that our faculty cover, that will be we'll post that online. You can also have a look through the website, but it's not always condensed in a nice way that makes it easy to access. So we will post a little kind of blurb about each faculty and who are interested in recruiting and what they will be supporting in terms of research. I would say most psychology PhD programs are mentored research programs. So even if you're not applying to UT, really trying to get a sense of what the research questions a potential mentor is interested in working on and training you in is really important to making decisions about what kind of program to be in. Okay, as we mentioned, there's TA opportunities, so that I think addresses that question. One question we often get is about an MA PhD, a master's or a PhD. So we don't have a terminal master's program, so you can't apply to our program just to get a master's. Now, you can get a master's degree within our program, and some of that's built into the coursework. So you do research in your first 2 years, you submit that as a master's, and then you move on to working on your dissertation. So that's part of our clinical program, but it can be part of the other psychology graduate programs. Do you need a master's to apply to the program? Not necessarily. I would say the clinical psychology program is quite competitive. And so already having some research experience and being able to explore the questions will probably enhance your ability to kind of step into that kind of program with a little bit more ease. But we understand that many people will come in after their undergraduate degree, though it's highly recommended that you have substantive research experience, because that's what you're going to be doing for 5 to 6 years. And if you don't have that experience, it's not that we think you can't do it. We just don't know if that's what you want to do because you haven't done it. So the more evidence you can kind of provide that research is really something that you are driven to do, the better we're able to assess that and admit you into a program. Let's see, other questions from the list.
Francis,
yeah,
while we're on that topic, can you say a little bit about whether they can transfer credits from their current master's program or not?
I'm saying no, just in case, Kimberly, any corrections to that? No, right?
We typically don't. We like for students to take coursework in our program. Kind of the exception to that is if you did a master's program prior and you have some stats courses, we don't waive that stats course requirement, but we will allow you to jump ahead to more advanced stats courses. So I guess the true answer is no, you'll still be doing the same coursework here at our program as everyone else, but you might be able to come in at a more advanced level.
Yeah, so we won't make you retake things per se, but you'll have to do the same amount of coursework. And our program actually has very little coursework relative to other programs, so it is pretty minimal.
There were a couple of questions in terms of the programs. So I think somebody was interested in knowing, and I think what the question means is transferring between programs, meaning I think between clinical program and the general programs. Does that happen?
No, we actually don't allow that because the clinical program, because of the APA accreditation guidelines, the classes are much more sequential. And so it's too hard to try to jump back and forth. Now, it could be possible if you were clinical and decided, I really just don't want to do the clinical training piece anymore. I want to go general psychology. We have had students that do that. So you could go switch from clinical into general, but not the other way around.
And then there were also a couple of questions about if you're really interested in being a clinician, should you still consider our clinical program, or should they just go straight into a clinical focused program?
My view is that you should go directly into a clinical focused program because there's so much research expectation. And if you're not meeting those expectations, you can really struggle in the program. And so why do that if you don't need to do it? You only need a master's degree to get, to be a practicing psychologist. And so I think you should, if that's really your passion, then you should find a program that's going to focus on that and not add a second degree program on top of that to stress you out.
Sorry, one final question is, do we have anybody who studies psychology of religion?
We do.
Yeah,
go ahead, Frances.
Christine Lagar actually does some research on religion and different cultures as well. So she's in our general psychology program. I think there's increasing kind of study of religion in other research labs, as well as a kind of a protective factor of something that provides social support and meaning to relieve stress. So I think it definitely is a theme that's covered in Christine's lab, but elsewhere as well.
And then there were some questions about, like, what are some of the characteristics or things that we look for in good candidates. I think, are we talking about that in this session or in the third session? I think sort of the general candidates qualities.
I think we'll talk about it in the third session this morning.
I'm not ignoring your questions. I think we'll save that for later.
And Frances, there was a question, and I know we do get this a lot since you're in both areas. How do you determine if you should do behavioral neuroscience and psychology or go straight neuroscience for your PhD?
Yeah, that can be a tricky one. And most of our faculty who are in the behavioral neuroscience area are also appointed as faculty in the Institute of Neuroscience program. They are very different programs, though, in terms of the structure. And so, for example, the neuroscience programs tend to be rotation based. So you rotate between labs for your first year and a half, then decide who to work with, hope that they're interested in taking students, and go from there. If you have a really sound idea of what you want to do early on, you might consider the psychology program, but a lot of it will depend on the mentor. And there are other things like qualifying exams that are present in the neuroscience program, but not in the psychology program. It also changes the context of who you're training with. So if you're really interested in behavior, in kind of that psychology context, then behavioral neuroscience and psychology might be a better fit. If you're more interested in cellular molecular neuroscience, then neuroscience might be a better fit. So it really does, it's about your kind of specific interests.
Could we talk a little bit about admission application fee waiver, especially for international students?
So we do have a fee waiver process, and I'll let Kimberly just describe how that works.
Yeah, so we do have an application process for the fee waivers. For U.S. students, you will go through our graduate school, and there's information on our admissions page, a link that you can go to. And then for international students, we have an application process that you can fill out, and there's a link again on our admissions page. And we are not able to provide waivers necessarily for everyone who applies, but we usually have about 10 or so application waivers. The fee right now for US is $65 and international is $95. So definitely if you, it does add up when you're applying to multiple programs. So take advantage of those. Most schools do have waivers. International can be a little trickier. And so, but I'm finding that more programs are creating a waiver for that. So definitely if you don't see something on a website as you're looking at programs, reach out to their admissions coordinator and ask.
And a little bit like admissions in general, having had that contact with a potential mentor will probably also be important for the waiver, because we're going to ask mentors, is this someone who would likely get admitted into the program? That will make you more competitive for the waivers. So if you've already been interacting with a potential faculty member before you submit your application, then that will strengthen your likelihood of getting a waiver. A few other questions that we got submitted before the session ask about funding for out-of-state applicants and international students. I'll hand it over to Kimberly to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so for our international applicants, we provide the same funding. So there are a few additional fees that you are assessed through the university, and we do cover those. So in terms of your tuition bill, you won't have any tuition or international fees. Insurance is provided for you either through your employment as a TA or a GRA or through your fellowship. So you really receive the same funding package as domestic students. There are fewer national grant applications or external grant applications that you can apply for, but there are some out there, and we do have a grant specialist that works just with our department. And so together between the two of us, we can help you find something. Our international students have been pretty successful in getting a number of grants. Some are smaller that help more with research expenses, and then some are larger that cover tuition and stipend, that kind of thing. So they're definitely out there, and we will help you find them.
UT also has a program to support undocumented students. It's called the Monarch Student Program. And it covers a broad range of kind of supporting undocumented students in the program, but also helping with financial support. So that would be something to look at for more information on that. And then there was also kind of a question about job opportunities for PhDs. And really with a PhD, you can go into a lot of different jobs afterwards. I'd say typically there are pay grades that require a PhD. So if you want to enter into a certain pay grade for a position or research position, either in academia or elsewhere, having a PhD will put you in a different tier of pay. So, I think the job pays will depend on where you go. The more data sciences heavy training you have, probably the higher the pay. I think you can probably think about, making about $75,000 a year with a PhD out of your PhD, depending on where you go. If you stay in academia to get additional training, it'll be lower than that. But again, you're getting more training to build up to that kind of salary state. I think that's everything from the list of questions. Were there anything we missed in the chat?
I know there have been quite a few questions about counseling degree versus clinical degree. And so just kind of to maybe help you think about it, our program is a research focused program. So what you're being trained as a clinician, but that's really secondary to your research. And a good way to think about it is that your focus is really to do the types of research to inform clinicians or counselors on how to best treat their patients. So if your goal is to solely work with patients, one-on-one group therapy sessions, that kind of thing, have a private practice, then counseling psychology is what you want to go for. And at UT, that's housed under the educational psychology department. They offer both an MA and a PhD in counseling psychology. And then our program, again, it's for those who really are research focused. Some of our graduate students do go on to have an academic research career and then a small private practice on the side. That's completely possible, but I would say the majority of our students are going into research academic type jobs.
And I'd say what differentiates our clinical students in terms of their research is they generally are working with perhaps clinical populations or asking questions about mental health. So, which you could do in other areas of psychology as well. So there's nothing that requires clinical training to do that, but that's, you know, they're working with faculty that are interested in depression, anxiety, and other mental health concerns.
Let me just ask a couple of questions and we'll wrap up. And some of the questions that you guys asked that we didn't address, I hope we will be able to address them in next 2 sessions. If not, always feel free to reach out to any one of us to get the answers. We are not trying to ignore you. I assume we don't know much about School of Psychology's funding. Do we? Kimberly, do you have any idea whether they also support their grad students with stipend?
I'm sorry, what was the question, Joanne?
School of Psychology. I mean, yeah, the school psychology. So that's the psych ed program.
They do support their students. It's not quite the same level of funding that we provide, but I believe they no longer just admit students as self-funded. I think they do provide funding for all students now.
Okay. And then we do have students who come from, who have different majors in undergraduate programs. It doesn't have to be psychology, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And,
Okay.
you know, we have people coming from computer sciences background, from biology backgrounds. Sometimes, you know, people will do an undergraduate degree in one discipline, maybe want to try out psychology, do a post-bac program or master's in psychology, and then head into the PhD program. But I don't think there would be too much to set you back if you don't have an undergraduate degree in psychology. Certainly you'll need, I think it's advantageous to have a statistics background of some sort. So having some undergraduate courses in statistics, and most of the statistics is taught in R. And so if you're uncomfortable with R, that would be something to help you navigate the program better.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up this session. Thank you, Kimberly and Francis, and I'm going to stop the recording for now.